The Story Girl, Chapter 21. Dreamers of Dreams. August went out and September came in. Harvest was ended, and though summer was not yet gone, her face was turned westering. The asters lettered her retreating footsteps in purple script, and over the hills and valleys hung a faint blue smoke, as if nature were worshipping at her woodland altar. The apples began to burn red on the bending boughs. Crickets sang day and night. Squirrels chattered secrets of polychinelle in the spruces. The sunshine was as thick and yellow as molten gold. School opened, and we saw denizens of the hill farms lived happy days of harmless work and necessary play, closing in nights of peaceful, undisturbed slumber under a roof watched over by autumnal stars. At least our slumbers were peaceful and undisturbed until our orgy of dreaming began. "I would really like to know what special kind of deviltry you young fry are up to this time," said Uncle Roger one evening as he passed through the orchard with his gun on his shoulder, bound for the swamp. We were sitting in a circle before the pulpit stone, each writing diligently in an exercise book and eating the Reverend Mr. Scott's plums, which always reached their prime of juicy golden green flesh and bloomy blue skin in September. The Mr. Reverend Scott was dead and gone, but those plums certainly kept his memory green, as his forgotten sermons could never have done. "Oh," said Felicity in a shocked tone when Uncle Roger had passed by. "Uncle Roger swore." "Oh, no, he didn't," said the Story Girl quickly. "Deviltry isn't swearing at all. It only means extra bad mischief." "Well, it's not a very nice word anyhow," said Felicity. "No, it isn't," agreed the Story Girl with a regretful sigh. "It's very expressive, but it isn't nice. That is the way with so many words. They're expressive, but they're not nice, and so a girl can't use them." The Story Girl sighed again. She loved expressive words, and treasured them as some girls might have treasured jewels. To her, they were as lustrous pearls, threaded on the crimson cord of a vivid fancy. When she met with a new one, she uttered it over and over to herself in solitude, weighing it, caressing it, infusing it with the radiance of her voice, making it her own in all its possibilities forever. "Well, anyhow, it isn't a suitable word in this case," insisted Felicity. "We were not up to any extra bad mischief. Writing down one's dreams isn't mischief at all." Certainly it wasn't. Surely not even the straightest sect of the grown-ups could call it so. If writing down your dreams with agonizing care as to composition and spelling, for who knew that the eyes of the next generation might not read the record, were not a harmless amusement, could anything be called so? I ask you. We had been at it for a fortnight, and during that time we only lived to have dreams and write them down. The Story Girl had originated the idea one evening in the rustling, rain-wet ways of the spruce wood, where we were picking gum after a day of showers. When we had picked enough, we sat down on the moss-grown stones at the end of a long arcade, where it opened out on the harvest golden valley below us, our jaws exercising themselves vigorously on the spoil of our climbings. We were never allowed to chew gum in school or in company, but in the wood and field, orchard and hayloft, such rules were in abeyance. "My Aunt Jane used to say it wasn't polite to chew gum anywhere," said Peter rather ruefully. "I don't suppose your Aunt Jane knew all the rules of etiquette," said Felicity, designing to crush Peter with a big word borrowed from the Family Guide. But Peter was not to be crushed. He had in him a certain toughness of fiber that would have been proof against a whole dictionary. "She did too," he retorted. "My Aunt Jane was a real lady, even if she was only a Craig. She knew all those rules, and she kept them when there were nobody round her. just as the same as when somebody was. And she was smart. If Father had had half her get up and get, I wouldn't be a hired boy today." "Have you any idea where your father is?" asked Dan. "No," said Peter indifferently. "The last we heard of him, he was in Maine lumber woods. But that was 3 years ago, and I don't know where he is now," added Peter deliberately, taking his gum from his mouth to make his statement more expressive. "I don't care." "Oh, Peter, that sounds dreadful," said Cecily. "Your own father?" "Well," said Peter defiantly, "if your own father had run away when you was a baby and left your mother to earn her living by washing and working out, I guess you wouldn't care much about him either." "Perhaps your father may come home some of these days with a huge fortune," suggested the Story Girl. "Perhaps pigs may whistle, but they've poor mouths for it," was all the answer Peter deigned to this charming suggestion. "There goes Mr. Campbell down the road," said Dan. "That's his new mare. Isn't she a dandy? She's got skin like black satin. He calls her Betty Sherman." "I don't think it's a very nice thing to call a horse after your own grandmother," said Felicity. "Betty Sherman would have thought it a compliment," said the Story Girl. "Maybe she would. She couldn't have been very nice herself, or she never would have gone and asked a man to marry her," said Felicity. "Why not? Goodness me, it was dreadful. Would you do such a thing yourself?" "Well, I don't know," said the Story Girl, her eyes gleaming with impish laughter. "If I wanted him dreadfully, and he wouldn't do the asking, perhaps I would." "I'd rather die an old maid 40 times over," exclaimed Felicity. "Nobody as pretty as you will ever be an old maid, Felicity," said Peter, who never put too fine an edge on his compliments. Felicity tossed her golden-tressed head and tried to look angry, but made a dismal failure of it. "It wouldn't be ladylike to ask anyone to marry you, you know," argued Cecily. "I don't suppose the Family Guide would think so," agreed the Story Girl lazily, with some sarcasm in her voice. The Story Girl never held the Family Guide in such reverence as did Felicity and Cecily. They pored over the etiquette column every week, and could have told you on demand just exactly what kind of gloves should be worn at a wedding, what you should say when introducing or being introduced, and how you ought to look when your best young man came to see you. "You say Mrs. Richard Cook asked her husband to marry her?" said Dan. "Uncle Roger says she didn't exactly ask him, but she helped the lame dog over the stile so slick that Richard was engaged to her before he knew what had happened to him," the Story Girl said. "I know a story about Mrs. Richard Cook's grandmother. She was one of those women who are always saying, 'I told you so.'" "Take notice, Felicity," said Dan, aside. "And she was very stubborn. Soon after she was married, she and her husband quarreled about an apple tree they had planted in their orchard. The label was lost. She said it was a famous, and he declared it was a yellow transparent. They fought over it till the neighbors came out to listen. Finally, he got so angry that he told her to shut up. They didn't have any family guides in those days, so he didn't know it wasn't polite to say shut up to your wife. I suppose she thought she would teach him manners. For, would you believe it, that woman did shut up and never spoke one single word to her husband for 5 years. And then, in 5 years' time, the tree bore apples. They were yellow transparents. And then she spoke at last. She said, 'I told you so.'" "And did she talk to him after that as usual?" asked Sara Ray. "Oh, yes. She was just the same as used to be," said the Story Girl wryly. "But that doesn't belong to the story. It stops when she spoke at last." "You're never satisfied to leave a story where it should stop, Sara Ray." "Well, I always like to know what happened afterwards," said Sara Ray. "Uncle Roger says he wouldn't want a wife he could never quarrel with," remarked Dan. "He says it would be too tame a life for him." I wonder if Uncle Roger will always stay a bachelor, said Cecily. He seems really happy, observed Peter. Ma says that it's all right as long as he is a bachelor because he won't take anyone, said Felicity. But if he wakes up some day and finds he is an old bachelor because he can't get anyone, it'll have a very different flavor. If your Aunt Olivia was to up and get married, what would your Uncle Roger do for a housekeeper? Asked Peter. Oh, but Aunt Olivia will never marry now, said Felicity. Why, she's 29 next January. Well, of course, that's pretty old, admitted Peter, but she might find someone who wouldn't mind that, seeing she's so pretty. It would be awful splendid and exciting to have a wedding in the family, wouldn't it? Said Cecily. I've never seen anyone get married, and I'd just love it. I've been to 4 funerals, but not one single wedding. I've never even got to a funeral, said Sara Ray gloomily. There's the wedding veil of the proud princess, said Cecily, pointing to a long drift of filmy vapor in the southwestern sky. And look at that sweet pink cloud below it, added Felicity. Maybe that little pink cloud is a dream getting all ready to float down into somebody's sleep, suggested the Story Girl. I had a perfectly awful dream last night, said Cecily, with a shudder of remembrance. I dreamt I was on a desert island inhabited by tigers and natives with 2 heads. Oh, said the Story Girl. She looked up at Cecily half reproachfully. Why couldn't you tell it better than that? If I had such a dream, I could tell it so that everybody else would feel as if they had the dream too. Well, I'm not you, countered Cecily. I wouldn't want to frighten anyone as I was frightened. It was an awful dream, but it was kind of interesting too. I've had some real interesting dreams, said Peter, but I can't remember them long. I wish I could. Why don't you write them down? Suggested the Story Girl. Oh, she turned upon us a face illuminated with a sudden inspiration. I've an idea. Let us each get an exercise book and write down all of our dreams just as we dreamt them, and then we'll see who'll have the most interesting collection, and we'll have them to read and laugh over when we're old and gray. Instantly we all saw ourselves and each other by inner vision, old and gray. All but the Story Girl. We could not picture her as old, always as long as she lived, so it seemed to us. Must she have sleek brown curls, a voice like the sound of a hairspring in the wind, and eyes that were stars of eternal youth. Chapter 22. The Dream Books. The next day the Story Girl coaxed Uncle Roger to take her to Markdale, and there she bought our dream books. They were 10 cents apiece, with ruled pages and green covers. My own lies open beside me as I write, its yellow pages inscribed with the visions that haunted my childish slumbers on those nights of long ago. On the cover is pasted a lady's visiting card, on which is written, "The Dream Book of Beverly King." Cecily had a packet of visiting cards, which she was hoarding against the day when she would be grown up and could put the calling etiquette of the Family Guide into practice, but she generously gave us all one apiece for the cover of our dream books. As I turn the pages and glance over the naive records, each one beginning, "Last night I dreamed," the past comes vividly back. I see that bowery orchard shining in memory with a soft glow of beauty, the light that never was on land or sea, where we sat on those September evenings and wrote down our dreams, when the cares of the day were over and there was nothing to interfere with the pleasing throes of composition. Peter, Dan, Felix, Cecily, Felicity, Sara Ray, and the Story Girl, they are all around me once more, in the sweet, scented, faded grasses, each with open dream book and pencil in hand, now writing busily, now staring fixedly into space in search of some elusive word or phrase which might best describe the indescribable. I hear their laughing voices. I see their bright, unclouded eyes in that little old book filled with cramped, boyish writing. Well, there we sat, writing our dream books, and Uncle Roger passed by and accused us of being up to deviltry, to very bad mischief. Each of us was very anxious to possess the most exciting record, but we were an honorable little crew, and I do not think anybody was ever written down in those dream books which had not really been dreamed. We had expected that the Story Girl would eclipse us all in the matter of dreams, but, at least in the beginning, her dreams were no more remarkable than those of the rest of us. In Dreamland we were all equal. Cecily indeed seemed to have the most decided talent for dramatic dreams. That meekest and mildest of girls was in the habit of dreaming truly terrible things, almost every night. Battles, murders, or sudden death played some part in her vision. On the other hand, Dan, who was a somewhat truculent fellow, addicted to the perusal of dime novels, which he borrowed from the other boys in school, dreamed dreams of such a peaceful and pastoral character that he was quite disgusted with the result of tame pages of his dream book. But if the Story Girl could not dream anything more wonderful than the rest of us, she scored when it came to telling. To her, her dreams were tales as good or as bad as dreaming it yourself. As far as writing them down was concerned, I believe that I, Beverly King, carried off the palm. I was considered to possess a pretty knack of composition, but the Story Girl went me one better even there, because, having inherited something of her father's talent for drawing, she illustrated her dreams with sketches and certainly caught the spirit of them. Whatever might be said of their technical excellence, she had an especial knack for drawing monstrosities, and I vividly recall the picture of the enormous and hideous lizard looking like a reptile of the pterodactyl period, which she had dreamed of seeing crawling across the roof of the house. On another occasion she had a frightful dream. At least it seemed frightful while she told it to us, and described the dreadful feeling it had given her, of being chased around the parlor by the ottoman, which made faces at her. She drew a picture of the grimacing ottoman on the margin of her dream book, which so scared Sara Ray when she beheld it that she cried all the way home, and insisted on sleeping that night with Judy Pineau, lest the furniture take to pursuing her also. Sara Ray's own dreams never amounted to much. She was always in trouble of some sort, couldn't get her hair braided or her shoes on the right feet. The only thing worth mentioning in the way of dreams that Sara Ray ever achieved was when she dreamt that she went up in a balloon and fell out. I expected to come down with an awful thud, she said, shuddering, but I lit as light as a feather and woke up right away. If you hadn't woke up, you'd have died, said Peter with a dark significance. If you dreamt of falling and don't wake up, you do land in a thud, and it kills you. That's what happens to people who die in their sleep. How do you know? Said Dan skeptically. Nobody who died in his sleep could ever tell it. My Aunt Jane told me so, said Peter. I suppose that settled it, said Felicity, disagreeably. You always say something nasty when I mention my Aunt Jane, said Peter reproachfully. What did I say that was nasty? Cried Felicity. I didn't say a single thing. Well, it sounded nasty, said Peter, who knew that it is the tone that makes the music. What did your Aunt Jane look like? Asked Cecily sympathetically. Was she pretty? No, conceded Peter reluctantly. She wasn't pretty, but she looked like the woman in the picture of the Story Girl's father sent her last week, the one with a shiny ring round her head and the baby in her lap. I've seen Aunt Jane look at me just like the woman looks at her baby. Ma never looks so. Poor Ma is too busy washing. I wish I could dream of my Aunt Jane. I never do." "Dream of the dead, you'll hear of the living," quoted Felix oracally. "I dreamt last night that I threw a lighted match into the keg of gunpowder in Mr. Cook's store at Markdale," said Peter. "It blew up, and everything blew up, and they fished me out of the mess, but I woke up before I had time to find out if it killed me or not." "I dreamt last night that I had really truly curly hair," said Cecily mournfully, "and oh, I was so happy. It was dreadful to wake up and find that it was straight." Felix, that sober, solid fellow, dreamed constantly of flying through the air. His descriptions of his aerial flights over the tree-tops and dreamland always filled us with envy. None of the rest of us could ever compose such a dream, not even the Story Girl, who might have been expecting to dream of flying if anybody did. Felix had a knack of dreaming anyhow, and his dream book, while suffering somewhat in composition of literary style, was about the best of the lot when it came to the subject matter. Cecily's might be more dramatic, but Felix's was more amusing. The dream which we all counted his masterpiece was the one in which a menagerie had camped in the orchard, and a rhinoceros chased Aunt Janet around and around the pulpit stone, but turning into an inoffensive pig when it was on the point of catching her. Felix had a sick spell soon after we began our dream books. It was an attack of a kind to which he was somewhat subject, and Aunt Janet essayed to cure him by administering a dose of liver pills, which Elder Fruin had assured her were a cure-all for every disease of flesh and hair. But Felix flatly refused to take liver pills. Mexican tea he would drink, but liver pills he would not take, in spite of his own suffering and Aunt Janet's command and entreaties. I could not understand his antipathy to the insignificant little white pellets, which were so easy to swallow, but he explained the matter to us in the orchard, when he had recovered his usual health and spirits. "I was afraid to take the liver pills for fear they'd prevent me from dreaming," he said. "Don't you remember old Miss Baxter in Toronto, Bev, and how she told me McLearin that she was subject to terrible dreams, and finally she took liver pills and never had any more dreams after that? I'd rather have died than risk it," concluded Felix solemnly. "I'd an exciting dream last night for once," said Dan triumphantly. "I dreamt old Peg Bowen chased me. I thought I was up in her house, and she took after me. You bet I scooted, and she caught me, yes, sir. I felt her skinny hand reached out and clutching my shoulders. I let out a screech and woke up." "I should think you did screech," said Felicity. "We heard you clean up to our room." "I hate to dream of being chased because I can never run," said Sara Ray with a shiver. "I just stand rooted to the ground and see it coming, and I can't stir. It don't sound much written out, but it's awful to go through. I'm sure I hope I'll never dream Peg Bowen chases me. I'll die if I do." "I wonder what Peg Bowen would really do to a fellow if she caught him," speculated Dan. "Peg Bowen doesn't need to catch you to do things to you," said Peter ominously. "She can put ill luck on you just by looking at you, and she will if you offend her." "I don't believe that," said the Story Girl airily. "Don't you? All right, then. Last summer she called at Lem Hills in Markdale, and he told her to clear out, and he'd set the dog on her if she didn't. Peg cleared out, and she went across his pasture muttering to herself and throwing her arms round, and next day his very best cow took sick and died. How do you account for that?" "It might have happened anyhow," said the Story Girl. "Somewhat less assuredly, though." "It might, but I'd just as soon Peg Bowen didn't look at my cows," said Peter. "As if you had any cows," giggled Felicity. "I'm going to have cows some day," said Peter, flushing. "I don't mean to be a hired boy all my life. I'll have a farm of my own, and cows and everything. You'll see if I won't." "I dreamt last night that we opened the blue chest," said the Story Girl, "and all the things were there, the blue china candlesticks, only it was brass in the dream, and the fruit basket with the apple on it, and the wedding dress, and the embroidered petticoat, and we were laughing and trying things on, and having such fun, and Rachel Ward herself came and looked at us, so sad and reproachful, and we all felt ashamed, and I began to cry, and I woke up crying." "I dreamt last night that Felix was thin," said Peter, laughing. "He did look so odd. His clothes just hung loose, and he was going round trying to hold them on." Everybody thought this funny except Felix. He would not speak to Peter for 2 days because of it. Felicity also got into trouble because of her dreams. One night she woke up having just had a very exciting dream, but she went to sleep again, and in the morning she could not remember the dream at all. Felicity determined that she would never let another dream get away from her in such fashion, and the next time she awakened in the night, having dreamt that she was dead and buried, she promptly arose, lighted a candle, and proceeded to write the dream down then and there. While she employed, she contrived to upset the candle and set fire to her nightgown, and a brand new one, trimmed with any quantity of crocheted lace. A huge hole was burned in it, and when Aunt Janet discovered it, she lifted up her voice, and with no uncertain sounds. Felicity had never received a sharper scolding, but she took it very philosophically. She was used to her mother's bitter tongue, and she was not unduly sensitive. "Anyhow, I saved my dream," she said placidly, "and that, of course, was all that really mattered. Grown-up people were so strangely oblivious to the truly important things of life. Material for new garments of night or day could be bought in any shop for a trifling sum, and made up out of hand. But if a dream escapes you, in what market-place the wide world over can you hope to regain it? What coin of earthly minting will ever buy back for you that lost and lovely vision?" Chapter 23. Such Stuff as Dreams Are Made Of. "Last night I dreamt a dream. It wasn't a polite dream, so I won't write it down," said Peter. The girls saw this entry, but, to their credit, be it told, they never tried to find out what the dream was. As Peter said, they were ladies in the best and truest sense, and that much abused appellation. Full of fun and frolics and mischief they were, with all the defects of their qualities and all the wayward faults of youth. But no indelicate thought or vulgar word could have ever been sharp or uttered in their presence. Had any of us boys ever been guilty of such, Cecily's pale face would have colored with the blush of outraged purity, and Felicity's golden head would have lifted itself to its haughty indignation of insulted womanhood, and the Story Girl's splendid eyes would have flashed with such anger and scorn as would have shriveled the very soul of the wretched culprit. Dan was once guilty of swearing. Uncle Alex whipped him for it, and the only time he ever so punished any of us children. But it was because Cecily cried all night that Dan was filled with saving remorse and repentance. He vowed next day to Cecily that he would never swear again, and he kept his word. All at once the Story Girl and Peter began to forge ahead in the matter of dreaming. Their dreams suddenly became so lurid and dreadful and picturesque that it was hard for the rest of us to believe that they were not painting the lily rather freely in their account of them. But the Story Girl was the soul of honor, and Peter, early in life, had had his feet set in the path of truthfulness by Aunt Jane, and had never been known to stray from it. When they assured us solemnly that their dreams all happened exactly as described them, we were compelled to believe them. But there was something up. We felt sure of that. Peter and the Story Girl certainly had a secret between them, which they kept for a whole fortnight. She had a knack of keeping secrets anyhow, and moreover, all that fortnight she was strangely cranky and pestilent, and we found it was not wise to tease her. She was not well, so Aunt Olivia told Aunt Janet. "I don't know what is the matter with that child," said the former anxiously. "She hasn't seemed like herself the past 2 weeks. She complains of headaches, and she had no appetite. She is a dreadful color, too. I'll have to see a doctor about her if she doesn't get better soon." "Give her a good dose of Mexican tea, and try that first," said Aunt Janet. "I've saved many a doctor's bill in my family by using Mexican tea." The Mexican tea was duly administered, but produced no improvement in the condition of the Story Girl, who, however, went on dreaming after a fashion which soon made her dream book a veritable curiosity of literature. If we can't soon find out what makes Peter and the Story Girl dream like that, the rest of us might as well give up trying to write dream books, said Felix. Finally, we did find out. Felicity wormed the secret out of Peter by the employment of Dahlia wiles, such as have been the undoing of many a miserable male creature since Samson's day. She first threatened that she would never speak to him again if he didn't tell her, and then she promised him that, if he did, she would let him walk beside her to and from Sunday school all the rest of the summer and carry her books for her. Peter was not proof against this double attack. He yielded and told the secret. I expected that the Story Girl would overwhelm him with scorn and indignation, but she took it very coolly. "I knew Felicity would get it out of him some time," she said. "I think he has done well to hold out this long." Peter and the Story Girl, so it appeared, had wooed wild dreams to their pillows by the simple device of eating rich, indigestible things before they went to bed. Aunt Olivia knew nothing about it, of course. She permitted them only a plain, wholesome lunch at bedtime. But during the day, the Story Girl would smuggle upstairs various tidbits from the pantry, pudding, half in Peter's room and half in her own, and the result to these visions which had been our despair. "Last night I ate a piece of minced pie," she told, "and a lot of pickles and 2 grape jelly tarts, but I guess I overdid it because I got real sick and couldn't sleep at all. So, of course, I didn't have any dreams. I should have stopped with the pie and pickles, left the tarts alone. Peter did, and he had an elegant dream that Peg Bowen caught him and put him on to boil alive in the big black pot that hangs outside her door. He woke up before the water got hot, though. Well, Miss Felicity, you're pretty smart, but how will you like to walk on to Sunday school with a boy who wears patched trousers?" "I won't have to," said Felicity triumphantly. "Peter is having a new suit made. It's to be ready by Saturday. I knew that before I promised." Having discovered how to produce exciting dreams, we all promptly followed the example of Peter and the Story Girl. "There is no chance for me to have any horrid dreams," lamented Sara Ray, "because Ma won't let me have anything at all to eat before I go to bed, and I don't think it's at all fair." "Can't you hide something away through the day as we do?" said Felicity. "No," said Sara, shaking her head, a frown on her face. "Ma always keeps the pantry locked for fear Judy Pineau will treat her friends." For a week we ate unlawful lunches and dreamed dreams after our own hearts, and I regret to say bickered and squabbled incessantly through the daytime, for our indigestion went out of order, and our tempers followed suit. Even the Story Girl and I had a fight, something that had never happened before. Peter was the only one who kept his normal poise. Nothing could upset that boy's stomach. One night Cecily came into the pantry with a large cucumber and proceeded to devour the great part of it. The grown-ups were away that evening, attending a lecture in Markdale, so we ate our snacks openly without any recourse to ways that were dark. I remembered I supped that night off a solid hunk of fat pork, topped off with a slab of cold plum pudding. "I thought you didn't like cucumbers, Cecily," Dan remarked. "Neither I do," said Cecily with a grimace, "but Peter says they're splendid for dreaming. He ate one that night he had the dream about being caught by cannibals. I'd eat 3 cucumbers if I could have a dream like that." Cecily finished her cucumber and then drank a glass of milk, just as we heard the wheels of Uncle Alec's buggy rumbling over the bridge in the hollow. Felicity quickly restored pork pudding to their own places, and by the time Aunt Janet came we were all in our respective beds. Soon the house was dark and silent. I was just dropping into an uneasy slumber when I heard a commotion in the girls' room across the hall. Their door opened, and through our own open door I saw Felicity's white-clad figure flit down the stairs to Aunt Janet's room. From the door she had left came moans and cries. "Cecily's sick," said Dan, springing out of bed. "That cucumber must have disagreed with her." In a few minutes the whole household was astir. Cecily was sick, very, very sick. There was no doubt of that. She was even worse than Dan had been when he had eaten that bad berries. Uncle Alec, tired as he was from his hard day's work and evening outing, was dispatched for the doctor. Aunt Janet and Felicity administered all the homely remedies they could think of, but to no effect. Felicity told Aunt Janet of the cucumber, but Aunt Janet did not think the cucumber alone could be responsible for Cecily's alarming condition. "Cucumbers are indigestible, but never knew of them making any one so sick as this," she said anxiously. "What made the child eat a cucumber before going to bed? I didn't think she liked them." "It was that wretched Peter," sobbed Felicity indignantly. "He told her it would make her dream something extra." "What on earth did she want to dream for?" demanded Aunt Janet in bewilderment. "Oh, to have something worth while to write in her dream book, Ma. We all have dream books, you know, and every one wants their own to be the most exciting. And we've been eating rich things to make us dream, and it does. But Cecily—" "Oh, I'll never forgive myself," said Felicity, incoherently letting all kinds of cats out of the bag in her excitement and alarm. "Well, I wonder what on earth you young ones will do next," said Aunt Janet in the helpless tone of a woman who gives it all up. Cecily was no better when the doctor came. Like Aunt Janet, he declared that cucumbers alone could not have made her so ill. But when he found out that she had drank a glass of milk also, the mystery was solved. "Why, milk and cucumber together make a rank poison," he said. "No wonder the child is sick. There." Seeing the alarmed face around him, he said, There, don't be frightened. As old Mrs. Fraser says, it's no deadly. It won't kill her, but she'll probably be a pretty miserable girl for 2 or 3 days." She was, and we were all miserable in company. Aunt Janet investigated the whole affair, and the matter of our dream books was aired in family conclave. I do not know which hurt our feelings most, the scolding we got from Aunt Janet, or the ridicule which the grown-ups, especially Uncle Roger, showered on us. Peter received an extra setting down, which he considered rank injustice. "I don't tell Cecily to drink the milk, and the cucumber alone wouldn't have hurt her," he grumbled. Cecily was able to be out with us again that day, so Peter felt that he might venture on a grumble. Sides, She coaxed me to tell her what would be good for dreams, and I just told her as a favor, and now your Aunt Janet blames me for the whole trouble. And Aunt Janet says we are never to have anything to eat before we go to bed after this except plain bread and milk, said Felix sadly. They'd like to stop us from dreaming altogether if they could, said the Story Girl. Well, anyway, they can't prevent us from growing up, concluded Dan. We needn't worry about the bread and milk rule, said Felicity. Mom made a rule like that once before and kept it for a week, and then we just slipped back to the old way. That will be what will happen this time, too. But of course we won't be able to get any more rich things for supper, and our dreams will be pretty flat after this. Well, let's go down to the pulpit stone, and I'll tell you a story I know, said the Story Girl. We went and straight away drank the waters of the forgetfulness. In a brief space we were laughing right merrily, no longer remembering our wrongs at the hands of those cruel grown-ups. Our laughter echoed back from the barns and the spruce grove as if elfin of upper air were sharing in our mirth. Presently, also, the laughter of the grown-ups mingled with ours. Aunt Olivia and Uncle Roger and Aunt Janet and Uncle Alec came strolling through the orchard and joined our circle, as they sometimes did when the toil of the day was over and the magic time twixt light and dark brought truce of care and labor. 'Twas then we liked our grown-ups best, for then they seemed half children again. Uncle Roger and Uncle Alec lolled on the grass like boys, and Aunt Olivia looked more like a pansy than ever in the prettiest dress of pale purple print, with a knot of yellow ribbon at her throat, sat with her arm about Cecily and smiled at all of us. Aunt Janet's motherly face lost its everyday look of anxious care. The Story Girl was in great fertile that night. Never had her tale sparkled with such wit and archness. Sarah Stanley, said Aunt Olivia, shaking her finger at her, after a side-splitting yarn, if you don't watch out, you'll be famous some day. These funny stories are all right, said Uncle Roger, but for a real enjoyment, give me something with a creep in it. Sarah, tell us that story of the serpent woman I heard you tell one day last summer. The Story Girl began it glibly, but before she had gone far with it, I, who was sitting beside her, felt an unaccountable repulsion creeping over me. For the first time since I had known her, I wanted to draw away from the Story Girl. Looking around on the faces of the group, I saw that they all shared my feeling. Cecily had put her hands over her eyes. Peter was staring at the Story Girl with a fascinated, horror-stricken gaze. Aunt Olivia was pale and troubled. All looked as if they were held prisoner in the bonds of fearsome spell which they would gladly break, but could not. It was not our Story Girl who sat there telling the weird tale in her curdling voice. She had put on a new personality like a garment, and that personality was a venomous, evil, loathsome thing. I would rather have died than have touched the slim brown wrists on that which she supported herself. The light in her narrow orbs was the cold, merciless gleam of the serpent eyes. I felt frightened of this unholy creature who had suddenly come in our dear Story Girl's place. When the tale ended, there was a brief silence. Then Aunt Janet said severely, but with a sigh of relief, "Little girls shouldn't tell such horrible stories." This truly, Aunt Janet remark broke the spell. The grown-ups laughed rather shakily, and the Story Girl, our own dear Story Girl once more, and no serpent woman, said protestingly, "Well, Uncle Roger asked me to tell it. I don't like telling such stories either. They make me feel dreadful. Do you know, for just a little while I felt exactly like a snake." "You look like one," said Uncle Roger. "How on earth do you do it?" "I can't explain how I do it," said the Story Girl perplexedly. "It just does itself." Genius can never explain how it does it. It would not be genius if it could, and the Story Girl had genius. As we left the orchard, I walked along behind Uncle Roger and Aunt Olivia. "That was an uncanny exhibition for a girl of 14, you know, Roger," said Aunt Olivia musingly. "What is in store for that child?" "Fame," said Uncle Roger. "If she ever has a chance, that is, I suppose her father will see to that. At least I hope he will. You and I, Olivia, never had our chance. I hope Sara will have hers." This was my first inkling of what I was to understand more fully in later years. Uncle Roger and Aunt Olivia had both cherished certain dreams and ambitions in youth, but circumstances had denied them their chance, and those dreams had never been fulfilled. "One day, Olivia," went on Uncle Roger, "you and I may find ourselves the aunt and uncle of the foremost actress of our day. If a girl of 14 can make a couple of practical farmers and a pair of matter-of-fact housewives half believe for 10 minutes that she is really a snake, what won't she be able to do when she's 30? "Here you," said Uncle Roger, perceiving me, "cut along and get off to your bed. And mind you don't eat cucumbers and milk before you go."